I was delighted when earlier this year I was finally given permission to go to Eritrea, and I've been twice this year, and I've reported, done several reports for BBC TV, radio and online. I don't know whether you've seen any of my reports, but it was great for me to be able to fill that gap in my reporting experience. But that absolutely, the fact that I've only been there twice and only this year, it means that in a way I don't have any right to be standing here talking to you, because I'm a total novice when it comes to Eritrea. So please forgive me. But I thought what I wanted to talk about was something that Yar touched on, which was another gap. It was the gap between the Eritrea that we see or we read about in the media when we're not there, and also the Eritrea, I suppose, that's written about by human rights organisations, UN and others, and then the Eritrea that, even though I've only been there twice, that you experience when you actually go to the country. And before I went, I really tried to do my homework. I watched everything I could. I read as much as I could in the media, from UN reports, academic reports. I spoke to lots of people, but I think never before in my time of reporting on Africa, and I've reported on pretty much every country there, I have never ever had an experience of getting to the place and thinking this is another country compared with the one that I've been given an image of it, principally from other media. And that's absolutely not to say that Eritrea is some sort of paradise, even though it is demonized, I would say, in the Western media and by various organizations. And it's the image of Eritrea is incredibly limited, the way it's portrayed, and there's, in a way, I feel there's kind of three stereotypes that are attached to it, but all of those stereotypes have a grain of truth in them, even though they're very misleading. And one, which I'm sure all of you will be all too aware of and probably quite offended by, is this image of Eritrea as the North Korea of Africa. Another one, an image that I received from before I went there, was that it was some kind of giant prison camp where everybody was either in underground containers or forced into military conscription, not really national service, which is a much more complicated thing, but everybody was kind of forced to be a soldier for their whole lives. And then the more recent stereotype is that Eritrea is the fastest emptying country in Africa. That's the whole migration crisis, which has become a big media bonanza story, I suppose. And I'm sure that if I'd wanted to, I could have written my script for my TV reports, my radio reports, my BBC Online reports before I went to Eritrea that would have highlighted those stereotypes, and I probably would have been able to find examples when I was there to slot into those reports, and I could have presented Eritrea in that kind of a light, because nobody can deny that there are serious problems, or at least according to Western perceptions, there are serious limitations to Eritrea politically, given that it doesn't have opposition parties, it doesn't have parliament. There's all sorts of ways that you can look at Eritrea in a negative light if you're a Western journalist. Things like the lack of independent media, political prisoners, and the undoubted issue which has been discussed at length here of migration. So all of those issues are there, but for me anyway, when I got to Eritrea, that was not the whole picture by any means. And I felt, okay, as a journalist, my job is simply to report really what I see, and to allow as many people as possible to speak almost through me. I'm simply there to go and ask as many people as I can their opinions about various matters. But I thought from the media reports that I'd seen that it would be impossible for me to do that, because I read, for example, one quote from a journalist that said, of the 37 people I tried to interview in Eritrea, 37 people refused to speak to me. And then I saw other TV reports where people would go with their cameras, and then you just see the people who they were trying to interview literally just running away. So I was imagining that it was going to be impossible or very, very difficult for me to get anybody to speak to me on the record. And what I found completely astonishing is that even though I was there with a camera, and cameras are intimidating and aggressive objects, there was, honestly, me and the cameraman, we had never been to a country where it was so easy to get people to speak to us. It was just totally bizarre, because I was expecting the opposite. And of course, as I do everywhere, when you're a journalist, journalists are quite annoying, offensive people. They just go and ask people questions and kind of put them on the spot. But of course I'd say, you know, we'd show up at some market or something, or wherever we wanted to go. And by the way, we were responsible for our own transport and our own itinerary. We just kind of made it up as we went along. So we weren't being controlled in terms of where we went to. In fact, I was told I could go wherever I want, speak to whoever I wanted whenever I wanted, as long as I didn't go to military areas. And I just go and say, oh, hello, I'm Mary Harper from the BBC. We'd like to speak to you about whatever. And people were just unbelievably willing to talk. And a lot of people did give a sort of, I suppose you could call it a party line, that I'm proud of my country. It's a struggle, but it's good to struggle, and very positive sort of pride in Eritrea. But there were plenty of people who were prepared to be critical, and be critical on camera with their faces showing. Partly, a lot of people were critical about the economy, but there were also people, for example, these two young men who kind of sought me out. They heard that I was there, and they wanted to talk about how they really disapproved of people who left. They didn't want to run away, but they thought that big change needed to happen in Eritrea, but that it should come from within, and that young people should stay and fight for change from within in a peaceful way. And they were talking to me on camera, unafraid of being really quite vocal in their political opposition. And me and the cameraman, we decided to sort of blur out their faces, because we just thought we don't want something to happen to them because of what they've done, but because they've appeared on the BBC. But they never asked us to talk to us anonymously. So I just found that completely not what I was expecting. And another issue that I had in Eritrea was that I was told I would definitely have a minder from the Ministry of Information who would try to control everything that I did, and I wouldn't be able to operate without a minder. And if you watch a lot of the TV reports, you'll hear journalists saying, oh, I have a minder with me. Well, that was not the case when I was there at all. I think if somebody was trying to follow me, it would have been very difficult, because half the time the cameraman and I didn't even know where we were going next, because we would just see things very spontaneously and think, let's get out here and speak to the people if they'll talk to us. So that was just such a different experience. I suppose when it came to me sending my stories back to the BBC, because I was doing a lot of live reporting as well, the first story that I was doing was the Independence Day celebrations, and one thing that struck me was the fact that there were lots and lots of people from the diaspora had come back to join in the anniversary of 25 years of independence. And so my first reports mentioned that, and I sort of, in my reporting, I say it's ironic, because Eritrea is known as a country that everybody wants to run away from, but actually there are, and I was careful, I thought, I said there are thousands of people from the diaspora coming back, because I knew there were more than hundreds, just because of the people who were on the planes with me and others, and also all the hotels were full, and I'm pretty sure there were tens of thousands or even more, but I thought, let me just be very careful and say thousands. And the editors back in London, lots of them were saying, Mary, are you sure that you must have got that wrong? Can you take that line out about the diaspora going back, because that's not what's happening in Eritrea. Everyone's leaving. And I was like, well, I'm here. Listen to the people on the radio reports, or look at the people in the TV reports. They're from the diaspora. That's a big part of the story. So it was even a battle for me to try to sort of insert a bit of news that was contrary to this sort of blinkered knowledge about Eritrea that exists. So it was a challenge, and what I found interesting in Eritrea was that along with the way that I saw the country, which had a lot of very interesting, I suppose, positive things happening as well as the challenges, the diplomatic community there, who I had a long lunch with them, I had lots of discussions with them. This was mainly the Western diplomats, but others as well. They kind of shared my opinions, because I thought, have I actually gone mad? Am I being, I don't know, am I totally like getting it all wrong? Because what I was seeing was so different from the other media reports that I'd seen. And they were sort of in a way giving me reassurance that no, Mary, it's okay. Your assessments are not completely off. You're not being given some weird drink and still thinking that, being led to believe that this is something that it's not. And I said, and in fact, one very senior diplomat from an extremely powerful country said, in many ways, Eritrea is the perfect development partner, because it doesn't have Islamist violence, people work hard, the spirit of self-reliance, corruption is relatively low, although he obviously acknowledged big problems in his eyes with lack of political freedom, media freedom, political prisoners and others. And I said, well, why don't the people back in your capital city, why don't they listen to you? You're on the ground. And he and the other diplomats did express some frustration that their interpretation of what was happening in Eritrea was not shared by their seniors back in their capital cities. At the same time, there were things that I found frustrating about working as a journalist in Eritrea. And I suppose one of them, the issue has come up a little bit here, is that whenever I asked questions about why are there political prisoners, why is there a lack of political, more advancement, I suppose, towards a different kind of political system, always the answer was this long lecture about the border war with Ethiopia and this state of no war, no peace. And I can understand that that is an unresolved issue that is very unfair on Eritrea, but at the same time that was 16 years ago, and it's like, I sort of felt, okay, that is a crucial issue, a burning problem, but at the same time, not to say that that issue should be given up on, but at least when you're trying to explain things to outsiders, it isn't very helpful to just always hear this same lecture about the border war with Ethiopia. It just in a way it's kind of, I mean, it's not my job to give PR advice to Eritrea. I'm a journalist, but it sort of felt like that's bad PR on Eritrea's part. It's not very helpful to anybody, really. One thing I found quite bizarre about the way that Eritrea is portrayed in I suppose predominantly in the Western world by the media and others, the way that it's so demonized, but yet a lot of other African countries in the region are doing pretty much the same thing politically, or in terms of having lots of political prisoners, other countries like Somalia have they have massive violence that's been there. They have terrible human rights abuses. No one ever talks about Somali leaders being taken to the International Criminal Court, or Ethiopia, for example, which has a very limited kind of democracy and has lots of political prisoners, and yet you sort of see the hand of perhaps the dominant world powers, because Eritrea is their key, Ethiopia is their key brother in the area in terms of the war on terror. They're prepared to give it much more slack than Eritrea. So, I mean, whether you've seen my reports or not, I just hope that Eritrea continues, I suppose, to allow in journalists who can just go and find out for themselves, because I think if they're decent journalists who know what they're doing, they're going to give a more nuanced and sort of broad, and I hope fair, portrayal of Eritrea than the one that's been sort of the dominant, that very narrow image of it in the Western and other media. So thanks very much.